Support for Disrupted comes from the Connecticut Office of Film, Television, and Digital Media.
Students at University High School of Science and Engineering in Hartford have testified in front of lawmakers multiple times over the last couple of years. They're part of a club called the Social Justice League. Their goal? Access to fare free bus passes. Previously, buses were free to all riders from April 2022 to March 2023. Oluwaseyi Oluborode is vice president of the club and a current junior. She testified earlier this year during a Transportation Committee public hearing. She discussed what happened when her parents' work schedules changed.
I dropped out of volleyball because I knew the burden would be on my parents and hesitated to commit to after-school plans because it was no longer a guarantee that I had a ride home.
Nariyah Lindsay is president of the club and a graduating senior. Back in 2024, she testified during an Education Committee public hearing.
This then raises the question of, well, what are the alternatives? I'm sure there's something else you can do. But unfortunately, for a lot of us, there isn't. Or maybe you meant the walk down Albany Ave in the dark, a young girl scared and alone waiting to be someone's next target.
In 2024, the legislature passed a pilot bill. It provided a grant for Hartford and New Haven public schools to provide free city bus passes. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're learning how high school students have pushed for change. Later in the show, we hear about high school activism in the 60s and 70s, including how the FBI monitored students. But first, we're talking with Oluwaseyi and Nariyah about their experiences with the Social Justice League. When I spoke to these two students, they were at their high school, so you might hear some morning announcements in the background. Oluwaseyi and Nariyah, I am so excited to have both of you on Disrupted.
We're excited to see you and meet you.
Mm-hmm. You know, we spend a lot of time on this show talking about young people, talking about some of the issues and challenges and ways that young people are present. And so to be able to talk to two young people who are really on the front lines of speaking up to say, it's not enough to talk about young people. Let's listen to young people. And it's why we're so glad that you are here. Nariyah, you serve as president of the Social Justice League at University High School of Science and Engineering. Share with our listeners what that group is about and what are some of the goals of the Social Justice League.
Yeah, so Social Justice League actually started last year, which was my junior year, by a former student and our principal. The main purpose of SJL was to advocate for free city bus passes for all high school students once those were taken away by the state of Connecticut. I myself was chosen to join the group, but even if I wasn't, I would have joined anyways because it's such a good group to be a part of. And me personally, I used to take the bus. So being able to speak out about how my life was affected when the bus passes were taken away and how now I'm able to get a job or participate in after-school activities because I have that bus pass is something that's so powerful that I feel like everyone needs to hear.
Oluwaseyi, this sounds like something that's important to you and to Nariyah personally, but you are also advocating on behalf of your fellow students and your peers and making sure that people have access to the different things. What did it mean for you to become a part of this group?
Yeah, so my involvement in the Social Justice League was unlike Nariyah's in the sense that I didn't rely on the city bus for the vast majority of my high school career. I had the privilege of being able to call my parents and they would be there to pick me up from after-school activities and sports. But there would be a point in time in which my parents' work schedules would change drastically, and I could no longer depend on them to pick me up from a lot of the things that took place after school. And in that moment, I was able to tangibly experience a lot of the barriers that my peers had been facing for the past 4 years of high school. And that was what really would spark my passion for increasing the access young people had to public transit, I was initially assigned the Social Justice League as a case in the newspaper to write about, and I sat in on one meeting, and I was like, I want to be in it. So I dropped the story because I couldn't write about it if I was in it, and that was how that journey started.
Oluwaseyi, was it difficult for you to say, I want to move from being a reporter for the student newspaper to being a part of this group and seeing what's happening on the ground?
It was a natural shift for me. I've always been an advocate in my own ways because I grew up in a lot of spaces where I felt othered, whether it be my race or I was in just a lot of just environments where I kind of felt alienated from a lot of my peers. And so I kind of, grew the habit of advocating for myself. And it just became very natural for me to speak on behalf of other people. And I was reporting on their testimonies at the education hearing. So me and another one of my peers on the newspapers followed them to the Capitol, and I was hearing the stories of a lot of the students at our school, and I just knew in that moment that this was something that really aligned with my values, it really aligned with my passions, and that I think I could, contribute to this space.
Nariyah, this was an organization that started with students in partnership with your principal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's such an important point to make because there are a lot of people who assume that students and administrators are adversaries, right? That they're working against each other. But the reality in the day-to-day is that you all want the same thing. You want your students to feel supported, to be safe, to be able to explore whatever journey it is that their heart and their passion takes them. Talk to us about that partnership with your principal, who I know has been such a supporter. What did it mean for you as a student leader to have an administrator say, let's do this together?
To me, it meant a lot because I always knew that my teachers and the staff at my school cared about me, but sometimes it was hard to really feel that or see that, because sometimes you know something, but you don't actually see it happening in front of you. And to see that from our principal especially was so heartwarming because, before I was a junior, I didn't really have a close relationship with Mr. Tomini. We didn't talk much. He was a principal. You see him, you walk away, you run the other way of the hallway because he's coming. But to know that he actually really cares and is not just that authoritative figure in our school really meant a lot. And since I was spending more time with him in our club, I got to know him as a person more and what he stood for. And he really does care about his students. He was there every step of the way. He was the one that told us about the testifying experiences, connected us with a lot of legislators and stuff, all that was him. So he deserves all the credit that he gets.
It's a beautiful reminder of when we share a common goal, when we share common interest, what seems like it would keep us apart can actually be the thing to bring it together. You both have mentioned being in Hartford. You both have mentioned testifying. And I want our listeners to know that this student organization, the Social Justice League, worked to pass a bill to provide free transportation for students. In 2024, a pilot version of that bill was passed. Talk to us a little bit about that bill and what you were able to accomplish.
That bill allocated $300,000 worth of ARPA funding to the New Haven and the Hartford Public School District. It was split evenly, so we used that money in its entirety for 30-day city bus passes, and that funding is enough to support around 500 students for a school year. And it's currently implemented at our school. The distribution of the city bus passes aren't equal. A lot of them are within Buckley High School, University High School. There's some at Hartford Public High School and Weaver High School.
Like she said, we implemented it in our school a lot, and we give out those bus passes and we track the ridership, how much they ride the bus or where they're going with that bus pass.
Yeah.
And we collected our data to bring that to our legislators to show them that this is real. Students are using these bus passes to get to places and they need them.
Yeah, and we were able to, as Nariyah was saying, we were able to partner with people within CT Transit to track the routes that young people are using for these bus passes specifically and the frequency with which they're using them. So we saw a peak 2 hours before the school day and 4 hours after, which strongly indicates that young people are using the city bus to attend school and they're using it to engage in extracurricular activities, which is, why we're pushing so hard to make the city bus accessible for young people, because we understand how vital it is for them to access these parts of their communities.
As a journalist, I'm supposed to be objective. I'm just supposed to listen to what our guests say and bring it to the next thing. As an educator and as a mom, I am listening to the two of you with this big smile on my face. Because you as students, your organization, you as your peers, your school, have done something that very few people do when they are advocating for change. So that you said it's not enough to just make this change, to just use this important funding to get access. You are actually tracking the data to say, what's the impact that it's making? What does it mean for our peers to have access to jobs, to extracurriculars? And there are a lot of young people in Hartford, as in other communities, who are working not just to be able to buy clothes or to buy something for prom. They are working to support their families and their neighborhood and their community. And so because you have worked for this change, you are tracking the impact of it. You are also realizing, yes, that change, that implementation was important, but it's not enough. Because now you're able to see from the data, there's even more that needs to be done. That pilot version was passed in 2024, and you all are still working toward more legislation. Nariyah, tell us what you would like to see in a future version of the bill or an extension of the bill.
In an extension of the bill, I really want to see, not just, unlimited finite amount of bus passes being distributed to just a couple of schools. I want to see those bus passes being given out to everyone who needs them, all around the state of Connecticut, because I feel like every high school student deserves to have transportation. There should be no reason why you're wondering how you're going to get home from an after-school activity. All that stuff is a part of the high school experience, and I feel like every child deserves to experience that.
And to kind of add on to what Nariyah was saying, in Connecticut, if you live under 2 miles from your school, you're not eligible for a district-funded bus. And so a lot of the young people in the Hartford community rely on public transit just to get to school. And this is something that I hope we can expand to include all young people throughout the state. And we're currently advocating for Senate Bill 1243, which is an act concerning transportation services for high school students and for veterans. And if this bill were to be passed, it would allow veterans to get on the state-owned buses fare-free, and it would make it so that the Connecticut Department of Transportation and school districts could negotiate for reduced bus passes or completely free bus passes for students. And it's really, for me, it feels really elementary. Every young person should have a ride to school. Transportation ultimately is what allows us to be a part of a community. And when we don't acknowledge the disparities in access, especially within communities in Hartford and Bridgeport that have a high concentration of low-income students, we are effectively, ignoring this population of youth. And I don't think that we should be allowed, I don't think we should be allowing these barriers to education to, exist. The moment we detect them, they should be immediately undermined.
We are at a time in the state of Connecticut where a lot of school districts are facing some economic challenges, really deep economic challenges. You all have mentioned Hartford and New Haven and Bridgeport. The big cities of Connecticut get a lot of attention. But there are also a lot of rural districts and rural communities where, as federal dollars go away or get taken away, those local districts are saying, how do we continue to provide for our students? And for a state like Connecticut, that investment and commitment in young people is really an investment in the future of the state. I have to ask this very basic question. Nariyah, let me start with you. These are big problems, right? These are big challenges that a lot of quote unquote adults in the room can't seem to recognize the basic thing that you all just said, which is it should be common sense that young people should have safe access and passage to school, to work, to community. You testified before the state legislature, which I know a lot of adults who would be terrified to do that or would say like, no, it's not me. It's not my time to do that. What was it like for you to testify before lawmakers and say this is something you should pay attention to?
If I'm being completely honest, my heart was pumping out my chest. Like when I got up there to speak and I was looking at all these powerful people, it kind of made, like, it was such a weird feeling because I kind of felt small in front of all those people, but at the same time, I felt big and proud of myself for getting up there and speaking in front of all these powerful people. And my heart was beating so fast. Like I was so scared I was going to stumble on my words. But at the end, I was just glad that I got up there and had the courage to speak.
Oluwaseyi, what about you? What was the experience like to testify?
Yeah, I feel like I'm pretty comfortable when it comes to public speaking. I was really grateful for the opportunity to have my voice be heard in that space because government is constructed to where, adults are the main members. And we have a model of government that isn't inclusive when it comes to young people. And I just thought it was a very, important opportunity for me to speak on behalf of my own experiences with lacking transportation and how that personally undermined my connections to a community and on behalf of my peers, because I saw the ways in which the effects of a lack of transportation manifested in my friends' lives, in my own lives. I know just how pervasive the effects of not having access to transportation are and the ways that it silently excludes a lot of young people when it comes to their ability to engage in school and to their broader community. And I just thought it was so important. And that was enough for me. It kind of allowed me to bypass some of the nervousness.
I want to let you in on a little secret that's not really a secret. Those legislators that you testified before, they're often scared as well. Mm. Those adults in the room who are responsible for the day-to-day, they often feel a little intimidated by what's in front of them. And for the two of you to do it as high school students and to realize that even when you're scared, even when you're nervous, even when you're uncertain, it is your right to speak up. And the ways that you and your peers transform that power to say, yes, they may have the position, but the power rests with young people who are willing to say something. And as, we say in my family, to call a thing and make it clear that something needed to be done around transportation. I am curious, what are the next steps for the Social Justice League now that it sounds like the group is growing? When you have a win, then it attracts people because they're curious about, oh, that's great. I want to do that. What are the next steps for the Social Justice League?
So, like she mentioned before, we're still fighting on behalf of the cause for free bus passes for all high school students and veterans. That's kind of like our main focus right now. But in the next coming school year, we do hope to spread out a little wider and focus on other issues within our community that don't just have to do with free bus passes. And at the moment, we are also, reaching out to legislators or using our social media platform to reach out to people and get noticed.
So the legislative session doesn't end until June 4th. And so we're still holding on to that hope that the legislators within our state will do the right thing and pass Senate Bill 1243. So as of now, our focus is continuing to advocate for that bill. Our plans going on in the future, as Nariyah was saying, is perhaps expanding the initiatives that we advocate for that are focused within the Hartford community, and also to maybe create more partnerships with other youth organizations within the state, because we found that is super important to any advocacy campaign, having a lot of strong partners within that fight.
Nariyah, at the time that we are having this conversation, You are preparing for graduation and thinking about your future, thinking about the experiences that you've had in high school and what you want to carry forward. Talk to us a little bit about the plans after high school when you can say, I'm no longer a senior, I am now a graduate. What's next for you?
So I'm actually going to UConn for college. I'm a chemistry major, and I plan to double major in clinical psychology as well. But when I go to UConn, I do want to join and still participate in clubs that are similar to student government or the Social Justice League, because I feel like just because I'm not a high school student anymore doesn't mean that I don't have to speak out on issues that used to affect me for now current high school students. And I know that I'll be a resource for whenever anyone in the Social Justice League needs me.
Oluwaseyi, you are a rising senior. What's next for you?
Yeah, so this entire experience of, reaching out to legislators and testifying in front of these committees has completely, I would say, clarified what I want to do in the future. I'm definitely going to continue advocating for transportation specifically within the Hartford community and and for young students statewide. And I also definitely hope to, I definitely plan on being in the Social Justice League coming my senior year. But yeah, my plans moving forward are to keep on doing what I've been doing, using my voice and my story to create a tangible change for the lives of me and my peers.
I know that we have a lot of people at UConn and at universities across our region who listen to this show. I know there are a lot of community leaders, community members, and legislators that we are honored to count amongst our listeners. And I hope that they will listen to this conversation with you today, that they will reach out and support, but also that they will share it with other young people, because I know that they will be as inspired by listening to you as I am today. And we are so grateful that the two of you and your peers are advocating and not settling for what you know you deserve and what we all need to pour into your path. Nariyah Lindsay is a senior and president of the Social Justice League at University High School of Science and Engineering in Hartford. Oluwaseyi Oluborode is a junior at University High School of Science and Engineering and vice president of the Social Justice League. Thank you both.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Coming up, an historian talks about high school student activism in the 60s and 70s. We'll also hear about parents who reported student activity to the FBI.
Her anger kind of reached a boiling point, and in March 1968, she types a 2-page letter directly to J. Edgar Hoover, where she outlines what was going on in her household.
This is Disrupted. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're talking about high school students who are making a change in their communities. We often hear about the history of college activism, but we don't always hear about high school students and their activism. Dr. Aaron G. Fountain Jr. is an historian. He researches high school protest. His forthcoming book is called High School Students Unite: Teen Activism, Education Reform, and FBI Surveillance in Post-War America. It will be released in December of this year. The book highlights protests of the 1960s and 1970s, when activism often focused on issues like the Vietnam War and civil rights. Ask Dr. Fountain what methods high school students were using at the time to express their discontent.
A multitude of things. Of course, there's direct action. So it can be a walkout, a sit-in, a boycott, a strike, passing the petition. But there also are more subtle methods like publishing an underground newspaper, writing in letters to the editorial, showing up at Board of Education meeting minutes, and even negotiating with education officials at the state and local level. And there are so many examples that occurred around the country. I can give you, I'll give you one example. I'll talk about the 1968 Cincinnati high school sit-in, which I don't mind talking about because when I went down to Cincinnati to learn more about it, nobody at the archives had heard about it, which is a whole other issue within itself. So in 1967, like many schools around the country, Cincinnati is hit by racial violence. And in response, the school district puts police officers in and around campus. Very novel concept, very controversial. I know people are used to it now, but that was a pretty almost an unthinkable thing at the time. And high school students, largely black and white students, decided that they were going to negotiate with the superintendent, Paul Miller, for a set of demands. Of course, one of the demands that they wanted the removal of security forces from schools, but also they wanted recognition of black student unions, black history courses taught in school, more black administrators and faculty at the school. And of course, like many negotiations, the school officials, they listen, but they don't act. So in response, 1,400 black and white high school students organized a citywide sit-in, passed a petition. About 1,400 students participated in this demonstration in April of 1968. It was peaceful, but the school district responded with a heavy hand. The superintendent suspended approximately 1,306 students on 10-day suspensions. Other students were threatened with house arrest. Some were court-martialed and sent to court for immediate hearings, and others were taken away by police and put into station wagons. And in response, of course, the community was pretty outraged. Parents were outraged. Students were. But in the end, what happens is that there's like these renewed negotiations in the school district make some concessions. They eventually recognize the Black student unions, incorporate Black history courses, as well as recognize Black holidays. But like so many demonstrations and student uprisings, students had some of their demands met, but other demands were either just put to the side or killed effectively when school districts would say, or school boards would say that we'll look at it, but then over the summer, they just never bring it up again and then the issue kind of dies. So this is also all student uprisings had very mixed results, but they actually were pretty effective and they occurred nationwide. Probably well over 1,000 likely occurred in the late 60s and early 70s.
I want to draw out a word that you just used, and that word is uprising. Because I think in many ways, the word protest is so loaded. There is a particular judgment that's made about the word protest and often used to invalidate the essence of the concern that these are people who are organizing, coming together, sometimes organically, other times very strategically and deliberately to say, we want to harness the power that we have to raise this concern. And so an uprising is a form of resistance, whether it's against an institutional decision or institutional design or some pattern in society. Is it an intentional choice for you to use the word uprising or protest, or do you see those things on sort of the same plane of how high school students raise their voices?
See them on the same plane. I remember sitting at the Smithsonian Museum of African American History about a premiere for the Riot Report published by PBS, and that same question came up. And Jelani Cobbs, who was one person on the panel, along with Elizabeth Hinton, a professor at I think Yale University now, he mentioned that he actually doesn't mind using the word riot instead of uprising because when white people historically have riot, it's automatically assumed to have political context, but not in the same case when Black people do it. So whether I use uprising or protest, I pretty much see them in the same lens, and these were definitely planned. They were strategized. Of course, the people in power often accused them as being orchestrated by outside agitators. This was an accusation that plagued high school student activism throughout its duration and even today.
There's always this implicit assumption that young people don't really understand what they are protesting against, or young people are being used. I hear that when you see young people showing up at local school boards, or, we're now at the 5 years since the murder of George Floyd and some of the walkouts that high school students organized. And there were people who said, oh, they just don't know, they're being used. Their teachers are just brainwashing them. As pitiful as that is as a response. But there is this idea that there is some force, some subversive force that is using young people And the subtitle of your book mentions FBI surveillance, this idea that this is part of a bigger mission to infiltrate, to undermine U.S. society. How common was FBI surveillance of high school students in the 60s and 70s?
So this was something I was always suspicious about when I came across an article in an underground newspaper from Palo Alto, California, where the high school students who were part of this group called the United Student Movement bragged about being spied on by the FBI. Of course, for teenagers, that's kind of cool. And I filed a FOIA request, but I didn't really have any idea I was doing, and I was told nothing existed. So when I got to graduate school, I had a professor help me draft a proper FOIA document, and I filed one on the same organization, and turns out one actually existed. So it made me curious. I'm like, okay, well, what other organizations were spied on? I found positive hits from Milwaukee, Minneapolis, and over the course of 10 years, I have filed over 1,800 Freedom of Information Act requests and found out that the FBI, along with the local police department and military intelligence, spied on at least 366 high school organizations, underground newspapers, student-led demonstrations, and incidents of school violence. These investigations have occurred for anywhere from 1 month to 5 years. The files can be 2 pages to over 700 pages. What is so fascinating is the role that school officials, parents, and even fellow classmates took in initiating these investigations, as well as serving as informants. And I'll give you one example of a parent. There was a mother in Charlotte, North Carolina, March 1968. She lives this idyllic American lifestyle, nuclear family. They take trips to the coastal area in South Carolina. But one day her son gets involved in a group called the Charlotte Student Union, which was typical of independent student organization. It was largely a student rights groups to organize Charlotte area teenagers around issues considering constitutional rights for teenagers. And she grows suspicious. She used to be a typist for the FBI. And her and her husband constantly talk to their son, tell him that they don't want him to attend these meetings. But of course, as a teenager, he does anyway. So her anger kind of reached a boiling point. And in March 1968, she types a 2-page letter directly to J. Edgar Hoover, where she outlines what was going on in her household. Now, it's important to understand the parents who did this, whether it was on their own kids or other kids, they didn't see their kids as criminal. They pretty much saw their kids as being manipulated. And in the letter, she outlines that she believes that this group behind the Charlotte Student Union is communist-led, and that they should have an FBI official go into every school and teach students about the dangers of communism. And 1 year later, Hoover responds to her directly and opens an official investigation on the Charlotte Student Union, which was largely a surveillance operation. Most investigations of high school students largely were monitoring. However, if you go to the FBI vault on their website, you will see high school students involved in counterintelligence operations. So I'll give you another example. In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, December 1968, high school principal in Custer High School mailed some packages to the local FBI office containing an underground newspaper published by the Milwaukee Student Alliance. The paper was called The Open Door. And of course, like many investigations, the FBI starts to investigate the group. But interestingly, in February, they decided to do a counterintelligence operation. So they mail a package to a principal in a conservative suburb north of Milwaukee named McQuan. And in it, the package contained the underground newspaper, and 2 underground newspapers, actually. And it outlined in red pencil, they circle objectionable statements, and statements that pretty much would have caused a stir. And the principal she just reacts to it and goes to the school board and then persuades the school board to pass a measure that would automatically suspend or expel any student caught in possession of either underground newspaper. And for the FBI, that was a success in undermining the high school student activism occurring in the Milwaukee area.
I have to say this. This is fascinating and disturbing in so many ways, to think about how deeply that surveillance went, to the point where a mother would reach out to the FBI out of concern that her young person was being used in these ways, or that a principal and a teacher would be targeted. And as absurd as all of that sounds, thinking about the context and the time in the 1960s and 1970s, I can't help, Aaron, but draw some parallels to where we are right now in the United States, where there are efforts to set up hotlines or, email accounts to send if you have a concern that, your school or your teacher or someone proximate to young people is teaching them something that is subversive or something that is viewed as anti-American because it may be a book by an author that someone has deemed controversial. Am I wrong to think that, or do you, as the scholar of this topic and this era, see some parallels that make you say, wait a minute, we need to pay attention to what's going on because you know what happened during that period?
Yeah, it's hard to say because contemporary, many people didn't know that they were being spied on by the FBI. And it's so fascinating when you see the newspaper headlines, but then you get these FBI files and you see what was going on beneath the surface. Like in Davenport, Iowa, a group of high school students tried to create a SDS chapter. And the newspaper article is just reported that the faculty voted against it. But then when you look at an FBI file, it turns out a member on the faculty went to the FBI to gather anti-SDS literature and distribute it to his coworkers, which in turn influenced the faculty vote. So as of terms of today, it's so hard to say. I wouldn't be shocked, but of course, remember, the FBI is not the only group doing surveillance. It's also local police departments and military officials. Sometimes parents themselves decide to just take the initiative and send their kids to these meetings to serve as informants, as a conduit. In turn, they would actually share the information that their kid retrieved and send it to FBI or the local police department. So it can happen in a multitude of ways. But it's really hard to say what's going on currently. But I wouldn't be shocked, actually.
Coming up, more with historian Aaron G. Fountain Jr. He'll tell us whether the students he researched are still involved in activism today.
They often credit their early precociousness as a child to what they did in their adulthood.
This is Disrupted. Stay with us. Welcome back to Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're talking about high school students who want to make a difference in their communities. We're still joined by historian Dr. Aaron G. Fountain Jr. He's author of the forthcoming book, High School Students Unite, Teen Activism, Education Reform, and FBI Surveillance in Post-War America. Ask Dr. Fountain how he views high school activism today.
Yeah, today, I say technology and social media makes it so much easier to connect with your fellow peers from hundreds and thousands of miles away, which is so different than how it was 60 years ago. And I'll explain a little later what the difference were. But today, when you look at like the Parkland students, they were able within a month to organize a national high school demonstration against gun violence. Unthinkable 60 years ago. And even today, high school students are walking out of school to protest Trump's anti-DEI policy, as well as the his immigration policies. And I remember there was a demonstration that occurred at a military base, either in Germany or Japan. And at another military base in one of those countries, they cited the other demonstrations as an inspiration for their own. And you kind of see a lot of young people connecting on Instagram and TikTok. I mean, young people don't use Facebook as much anymore. It's kind of not considered cool. But yeah, now it's just the deliberate speed of information. Whereas 60 years ago, high school students had to meet one another by attending conferences, demonstrations, or communicating with each other through correspondence and underground newspapers. And one of the most notable things that happened during 1960s or 70s was the high school underground press. So underground newspapers were a ubiquitous countercultural phenomenon in the 60s and 70s. You could find them on street corners and stands, almost pretty much anywhere. Well, one thing that underground newspapers did was that they created syndicates, which was a newspaper exchange, similar to what you would see in any newspaper with the Associated Press and wire stories. Well, high school students were participants in underground newspapers like the Liberation News Service, one of the largest syndicates, and they would use the skills they learned from that to actually organize high school underground newspapers. So one of the first one was called the High School Independent Press Service, created in 1968 in New York City. It existed for like 9 or 10 issues, but it was pretty much the first newspaper exchange. And in its place, inadvertently, appeared the Chicago/Cooperative High School Independent Press Syndicate, which initially was created just by one student who wanted to collect Chicago area high school underground newspapers. And within almost a year, he started getting correspondence letters from students in Vermont and New Orleans, and had about like 20 subscribers. And over time, he would move. I talk about this in the book. It's a pretty lengthy story, but he would move around and the syndicate would survive. And over the course of 6 years, eventually they had to exchange about 700 newspapers and had correspondence with students in over 40 states, the territory of Puerto Rico, several Canadian provinces, England, Australia, and New Zealand. These archives are at Temple University, and you can read letters from students from different countries corresponding with the Cooperative High School Independent Press Syndicate, CHIPS as shorthand, asking how to create underground newspapers and wanted to become subscribers. So, but this was so gradual, something you couldn't just do instantly like today.
But it also, Aaron, has me longing for what that could look like today. Whereas now we have social media influencers who amass millions of followers playing video games or talking about, whatever is happening in their day to day, or they have a Substack and a Patreon, all these other ways they can do that. What would it look like to have that kind of news syndicate that is youth led, that uses the resources of technology and social media, which I imagine could have a lower entry cost than trying to, create something in the 60s and 70s, and using it in those ways, particularly since we've seen the decline of local media, local journalists covering those community-based issues, but still being able to connect in those ways. This entire book is eye-opening to me. The entire field of it is eye-opening to me. But I wonder if there was something that during your research really stood out to you as something that you said, wow, this is why I'm called to write this book at this time.
So, believe it or not, it was not the FBI stuff that surprised me. It was the fact that many people I interviewed who are now in their 70s met one another while in high school, whether they lived 100 miles away or 1,000 miles away. And in fact, two people I interviewed, one who grew up in Chicago, another grew up in Detroit, were still friends 50 years later. They met one another through anti-Vietnam War activism. And that's in many parts of this journey, I reconnected people who haven't spoke to one another in 50 years and often received messages of gratitude. It's like, thank you for reconnecting me with a friend who I just lost contact with since I graduated from high school. And the other thing too is that many people I interviewed were active. A lot of them, surprisingly, went into academia. There were numerous occasions where I would come across a name and I'm like, oh, I read that person's book. This happened with George Chauncey, a historian at University of Chicago who published Gay New York. I saw his name in the underground newspaper from Portland, Oregon. Similar with Martha Gutman. She's an architectural scholar at NYU, and she founded a group called the Greater Rochester High School Student Union, which she puts on her CV, which I find very hilarious and interesting. There's so many other examples. I remember the director of Babe, the 1995 film of the pig. I can't remember the premise. Yeah, he was a high school student activist in Australia. There's just so much of these connections, and of course, some of them went on to go into politics, become mayors of their cities, scientists, and other prominent people in fields, authors. I mean, the list goes on and on.
We often hear about the scars that adult activists bear of that sense of, was it worth the risk, or was it worth the harm and the challenge? Or do they become disillusioned by, we were fighting for this kind of change, and did it result? And so you talked about some of the high school negotiations of what they were demanding versus what they were able to receive. When you think about those high school student activists, the alumni of activism, if you will, that you were able to talk to and connect with, what do you hear? Is there a sense of disillusionment, or is there this idea of, we can make a difference right where we are?
Oh no, it's definitely mixed. There's always been this popular trope of 60 activists who settle for conventional lives and sold insurance. But So, like I said, some people were still active and they were really proud of what they did when they were young. Others, they kind of stepped back after graduating from high school. I remember talking to one guy in San Francisco. He went to San Francisco State College and he was there during the student strike in 68, 69. And he regretted, even 50 years later, not taking a photograph of a puppy that had wandered in the crowd where a policeman picked it up and was just holding it. And he just thought if he took a picture of it, the police would just snatch his camera away, or that his peers would just, criticize him for humanizing the quote unquote enemy. So he's like, yeah, I just stepped back from activism and I just take photography because it's apolitical and it just whatever captures my interest. But most people are still active in some form or fashion in their fields. And they often credit their early precociousness as a child to what they did in their adulthood. And like I said, the results they had were mixed. Nobody gets 100% of what they tried to accomplish. But no, there was definitely a sense of pride. And most people who I contacted were really excited to talk to me. It's only a few that didn't. And I learned that, you're talking about childhood. Some people have experienced childhood trauma, so they don't really care to recall it. But other people, they were more than happy, was excited that somebody was interested in this history.
I had a conversation with a panelist of historians back in the fall about what it means to be an historian in this moment, what it means to bear witness, and to have the opportunity to remind us of context so that history isn't fixed in terms of our understanding, our connection, and the ways that we use that understanding to move us forward. What does it mean for you to be an historian?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I see it as somebody who is a truth teller, but always knowing that you'll probably never 100% know the truth. Somebody who has to contextualize events, because one of historians' greatest pet peeve is when people assume things are happening for the first time. And we saw this a lot with Black Lives Matter, where people act like complaints about police brutality was something new, as if it was not a complaint that existed for a century. And somebody who I see myself as an educator. I'm in public history, and whenever I get a chance to talk to people, I always tell myself that the crowd I'm talking to are people who probably haven't sat in a history course for 50 something years. And are people, in many of them, because some of them are like retired, they probably learned history incorrectly, or what was the dominant teaching method or thought pattern at the time has been corrected, but they're kind of clueless. Like I talk to people who still think Reconstruction was something that was blamed because Black people were given too much rights too fast. And so I have to correct that. So no, I see myself as somebody who tries to, educate people in the best form that I can, and being truthful and trying to take contemporary academic scholarship, but not make it so esoteric that they don't understand what I'm trying to say. I make it as accessible as I possibly can, which is skills I've learned on public history jobs that I've had in the past.
There's a beautifully compelling quote as you enter the National Museum of African American History and Culture from John Hope Franklin that talks about we have an obligation to tell the unvarnished truth. And so we are grateful for historians like you who tell that unvarnished truth, who remind us of the power of the connection of history and the need to understand history and explore it in its fullness. Aaron G. Fountain Jr. is an historian. He's author of the forthcoming book, High School Students Unite, Teen Activism, Education Reform, and FBI Surveillance in Post-War America. It's set for release in December of 2025. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.
Disrupted is produced by Kevin Chang Barnum, Robin Doyon Aiken, and Meg Fitzgerald. You can listen to all the previous episodes of Disrupted by finding us wherever you get your podcast. And you can listen to new episodes every Friday at 9 a.m. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. Thanks for listening.